She threw me onto the sidewalk with a bag and a scream that still echoes inside my head. Said I was a disgrace, that my presence rotted the air in her house, and that I would die alone. The words cut deeper than any knife, but that wasn't what destroyed me. What really killed me was what I saw when I opened that bag. My name is Maria das Dores, but I stopped using that entire name a long time ago. Today they call me Dona Maria, some with respect, others with pity. I'm 67 years old. My hair is always tied in a simple bun. My hands are marked with calluses and the deep-set eyes of someone who has seen a lot of things they'd rather forget. I live in an old village on the outskirts of the city, a place where time passes slowly, but memory runs like a knife between the ribs. Until a week ago, I lived with my youngest daughter and my grandson. He helped where he could. I washed clothes, cooked, took care of the house when she went to work. I never asked for anything. No explanations, no excuses. I just wanted some peace at the end of my road. But peace, for those with a dirty past, is always an illusion. A white cloth covering a hole. All it takes is for the wind to change and everything comes back to life. That morning, I noticed something strange about her face. A mix of anger and fear. She avoided looking into my eyes. And when she saw that I had accidentally picked up a fallen envelope from her jacket pocket, she was transformed. He shouted. He cursed. He snatched the envelope from my hand like it was dynamite. And then it exploded. He sent me away. He said his grandson couldn't grow up around someone like me, that my past stinks, that my presence was like poison dripping onto the dishes in the house. I left crying, humiliated, not knowing where to go. It was raining fine. The asphalt looked like a broken mirror. The black plastic bag flew after me. She threw it hard, as if she wanted to get rid of a corpse. When it fell at my feet, I thought it was just a pile of old clothes, but it wasn't. I was shaking, not from the cold, but that mixture of pain, shame, and anger that only a rejected mother understands. I walked to the nearest bus stop. I sat on a bench wet from the drizzle, and only there, with the sound of cars and horns in the background, did I have the courage to open the bag. Inside, crumpled between my coat and a torn towel, were three things: an old photo of my daughter with a man I knew well, a wad of cash wrapped in plastic, and a gun. An old pistol, the same one that I buried one day in a backyard hundreds of kilometers away, the same one that disappeared when the past came to collect its debt years ago. My stomach turned. My hands were sweating. I didn't understand. That didn't make sense. Or he did too much. Because the truth, when it arrives, is never smooth. It comes in like wind through a broken window. It causes damage, spreads everything. But it also reveals what was hidden beneath the dust. My daughter always condemned me. I always said I was a weak, submissive, cowardly woman. She doesn't even know the half of it. She grew up not knowing why we changed cities so much. Why couldn't she have social media? Because I was looking over my shoulder all the time. She thought I was paranoid, that I made up stories. But now, with that gun in her hands, I understood that she didn't just know everything. She was repeating, and maybe even getting worse. The bag, which she threw at me like trash, was actually a cry for help disguised as contempt. She didn't kick me out just out of hate. She kicked me out because she knows I would recognize the tracks, the type of money, the kind of lie, the dark face of survival. There, sitting on that bench, I didn't cry anymore. The crying dried up. In its place came a strength I hadn't felt in decades. A voice inside me, low, firm, telling me I needed to do something, not for me, but for my grandson, for the last chance to break the cycle. Because when the past comes back, it doesn't knock on the door. He breaks in. If you're listening to this story and any part of it touched on wounds you thought were healed, stay here with me, because this is just the beginning. And I'll tell you everything, not because I want pity, but because maybe you are also carrying a bag full of truths that no one wanted to hear. If you believe that it's never too late to look back and face the ghosts, leave your like right now. Subscribe to The Emotion of Age. Channel and activate the bell. Here, we don't tell victims' stories. We tell stories of women who decided not to die in silence, even when the whole world says it's too late. And comment from which city you are watching, because pain may be silent, but dignity needs a voice. And I promise, this story will take you to the end, because what was in that bag changed everything. Even who I thought I was. I thought my past had died the day I buried that gun. The same day I swore I would never look back. But promises made in fear don't last. And now with that bag in my hands and my heart crushed, everything came back like a whirlwind. I was born in the north of the country, in a small village with unplastered houses and long nights. My father disappeared before I turned 2. My mother did what she could to feed us, but there was more hunger than flour. At 7, I already knew that silence was a shield, that looking too much into adults' eyes brought blows, that the best way to go, unnoticed, was to appear invisible. At 12, I knew the smell of blood. It wasn't mine. It was from a neighbor, Maria Helena, who was beaten to the bone by her husband and died 2 days later without anyone saying anything. That stuck in my throat for years. Fear shaped everything around me, and it shaped who I became. When I turned 15, my mother fell ill and I was sent to the big city to work in a boarding house. I washed clothes, cleaned floors, listened to conversations behind doors. There, I met Joachim. He was 20 years older than me, with dark eyes and promises sweeter than sugar. He said he would get me out of there, and took it off. But it didn't take me away from danger. It took me straight to the bottom of it. The first week, he handed me a brown envelope. He said it was just a matter of delivering it to a store. Just that. I delivered. And the next day, the house phone rang. It was him, nervous, saying that we couldn't go back there. The store had been invaded. A man was dead. I didn't understand anything. Only later did I realize that the envelope had money in it. Dirty money. I was a mule, and I didn't even know what that meant. The cycle started there. One job here, another there. Small deliveries, trips, meetings in dark bars. I got used to it. Fear, when it becomes routine, disguises itself as strength. And when I saw it, it was already too late. It was inside, right inside. At 22, I became pregnant with my first daughter. I hid what I was doing. He said he worked as a receptionist, traveling with a cosmetics company, lie after lie, but it was to protect. It was supposed to give food, milk, diaper, a house that didn't rain inside, and it was like that for a long time. The child's father disappeared before the birth. Another ghost, another abandonment. I was alone. I raised her as best I could. Then came the second daughter, with another man, and history repeated itself. Crime was not glamour. It was survival. It was what allowed me to pay the bills and not let them go through what I went through. For years, I was a shadow. I woke up early, smiled at my neighbors, pretended to be normal. But at night, he did things that still give me chills today. I once agreed to keep a car for 2 days. They said it was just a matter of keeping it. But on the second day, the police arrived. A body was in the trunk. A man missing for weeks. I ran away. I changed my name. I cut my hair. And I started again, in a neighboring city. The girls never knew about it, or at least I thought not. My mistake was underestimating the weight of the lie, because lies, when they grow, take root. And one day, everything you built on top of it starts to collapse. It was like that with me. My eldest daughter died in a motorcycle accident at 18. I never told anyone, but her helmet had been broken for weeks. She had asked me for money for a new one, and I said it couldn't be done. That month, I had accepted a risky job and needed to pay my silence. I prioritized fear, and she died. That was the first piece of my soul that broke. After that, I turned to stone. I did what needed to be done. I moved away from everything. I lived on the street for a while. He slept near a station, covered with newspaper, until a lady found me. He gave me soup. He called me daughter, and there began the slow journey back. Years later, I met my youngest daughter again. She was an adult, graduated, had a son. He said he needed help, that I was tired, that he wanted to forgive me. I accepted. Of course I accepted, because Mom always accepts even if she doesn't understand. I started living with her. We didn't talk about the past. It was a silent agreement. I pretended I was just an ordinary lady. She pretended to believe. The grandson called me grandma with a sweetness that made me forget the nights of sirens and running footsteps. But this was all thin glass. One time or another, it was going to explode. Now I understand. The bag wasn't just about the gift. It was about what was hidden. It was proof that she knew, that she too had plunged into the same swamp, perhaps out of necessity, maybe out of pride, maybe to prove that he was better than me. And it failed, because the blood that we try to wash away with silence always comes back. Stain your hands, stain the words. I lived lying to protect myself, but whoever protects with lies betrays the enemy behind his back. Today, I understand that the worst Thing I did was remain silent, to hide, pretend it didn't hurt, that the past is behind us. He never stayed. If you've made it this far, I want you to think with me. How many times have you also remained silent to protect someone? How many times did you swallow your scream to keep the family together, image intact? And was it worth it? Leave your comment with the word blame if you've already carried more than you should. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel. Activate the bell and share this story with someone who thinks they can no longer do it. Because sometimes healing begins when we stop lying to ourselves. I hid my story for fear of losing my daughter's love, but in the end, what I lost was the chance to teach the truth. And now, maybe it's too late. The next morning, the sky was pale, as if the world was also exhausted. The bag rested on the table in the small guest house where I managed to spend the night. The room smelled of old wood, and the bed creaked as I stood up, my body heavier than usual, as if every memory now had the weight of a stone inside me. I spent the entire morning awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the damp-stained ceiling. The weapon, the photos, the money, that wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. My daughter had chosen a path, and from what I could understand, it was the same thing I once tried to hide from her. For years, I protected that girl like someone protecting a flower in a minefield. And now, she was the field. It was the explosion. I didn't know who she was involved with, or how long, but I knew the signs very well. The money in large bills, wrapped with ribbon, smells like plastic and cheap perfume. The gun, old but clean, loaded. The photos, one of them, especially, wouldn't get out of my head. It was a man's face, young, dark, with a forced smile. He was sitting on a park bench, and behind him, in an almost invisible blur, I recognized an old acquaintance from my past, a name I hadn't heard in over 20 years, Vincent. When I saw that figure, my body froze. Vicente was one of the most dangerous of the group I worked with in the 90s, cold, calculating, manipulative. He was the kind of man who destroyed families with a handshake and a calm smile. He had disappeared from the map after an unsuccessful police operation. Everyone thought he had been killed, but there he was, blurred in the background of a photo kept by my daughter. That same afternoon, I went to an internet cafe. The owner recognized me from the neighborhood and let me use the computer for a few minutes without charging. I researched everything I could. I used the information I had, connected ends, and each new discovery made me deeper. The man in the photo was a public servant involved in a scandal involving embezzlement of funds from a social assistance program. My daughter worked as a coordinator for that same program. Reality hit me like a thunderbolt. She was involved in something big. It wasn't just a debt, a bad choice, an adventure. It was a scheme that she probably inherited. And me, I was once again in the middle of it all, and worse, being used without knowing it. That night, I tried calling her. I wanted an explanation. I wanted to hear from her that it was all a misunderstanding, that the gun belonged to someone else, that the money was to pay for surgery, that the photos were coincidence, but she didn't answer. The phone called and then went into automatic recording. So I went to my grandson's school. He saw me at the gate from afar and ran towards me. He hugged me as if nothing had happened. That disarmed me inside. He asked if I was going to come home. He said that his mother was acting strange, that she cried a lot at night, that she was always looking out the window, as if she was waiting for someone to knock. I wanted to cry, but I held myself back. I just promised everything was fine, that I would find a way, but things only got worse. 3 days later, upon leaving the bakery where I managed to wash dishes in exchange for coffee and a loaf of bread, I found 2 men waiting for me on the corner. They were wearing suits and sunglasses. They didn't introduce themselves as police officers or anything else. They just said that they knew who I was and that I should forget what I had seen. One of them handed me an envelope with 1,000 reais, and he said I was supposed to disappear, that my daughter was fine, and that if I cared about her, I would keep quiet. I saved the money without thinking. The fear came with force. But when I arrived at the guest house room and opened the envelope, I saw along with the money a copy of the same photo of the man on the bench, and on the back, handwritten, something that made me tremble all over. It was written, "History repeats itself when the truth is buried." That was a warning, a direct message, and it came from the type of people who don't send the same message twice. The next morning, my daughter's neighbor texted me. She still had my number saved. He said the police had gone to the house to ask questions. They asked about my daughter. About me? They said they were investigating irregular financial transactions, and there were anonymous complaints. It was at that moment that I realized the siege was closing, and if I didn't act, or she would go get stuck, or worse. And if she fell, she would take her grandson with her, the boy who still believed that his grandmother baked cake and that his mother was a hero. In a desperate attempt, I went back to her house. I waited on the sidewalk for hours. When she arrived, she didn't look me in the eye. I asked to come in. She denied it. I said I knew. Who had seen everything? Who knew about Vicente? About the money? She turned pale. He pulled me to the gate and said, through his teeth, that I didn't know anything, that she didn't need advice from someone who lived in the mud, that what she did was for justice, that the system owed and she was just collecting. At that moment, I understood that she really believed that somehow she had constructed a logic to justify what she did, maybe because that's what you've seen me do my entire life. And the worst part? It's just that, in part, she was right. The system has always charged more from those who have less, and maybe she was just trying to turn the tide, but in the wrong way. If you are listening to all this and feel a chill in your soul, comment below with the word truth, because sometimes it's only she who can save us, and sometimes she also destroys everything. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel and activate the bell, because in the next parts I will show how even those who think they have already paid for everything can discover that the past has high interest rates. And the worst punishment sometimes is watching our children repeat our mistakes, believing they are doing things differently. Share with someone who needs to hear this, because there is still a long way to go, and I will no longer be silent. That night, the sky was clear, but inside me there was only storm. I knew I had crossed a line, and it wasn't the first time. Only now it was my daughter who was on the other side, not as a victim, but as someone who followed, step by step, the same path that I once cursed. The difference is that I entered this world because I saw no way out, not her. She chose. He chose consciously, and that hurt more than any threat, any punch, any homeless night. After the conversation at the gate, I stood on the sidewalk, watching the lights in the room go out one by one. My grandson, probably already asleep, had no idea that his mother was sinking and that his grandmother was the only thing trying to stop the sinking. But how can you stop someone who doesn't want to be saved? How can you save someone who pushes you down every time you reach out? The next day, I went back to the internet cafe. I asked to print the photo. I wrote everything I knew on the back, name of those involved, approximate dates, connections. I made 2 copies and kept it inside my blouse. That was my only weapon, my only shield. What I didn't expect was that same afternoon, the humiliation would come from inside the house itself, and with enough force to make me collapse. The principal of my grandson's school called me. I said we needed to talk. I went there, my heart pounding. I thought he was hurt, or worse. But when I arrived, she greeted me with a hard, distant look. I said that my presence there was causing discomfort among the other parents. There were rumors circulating about my past, that there were old photos of me spread across community groups, that for safety's sake, I should no longer pick up my grandson from school. I didn't cry there. I didn't like it that way. I just thanked him, left, and walked aimlessly for almost an hour. When I stopped, I realized that I was in front of the old police station where, years ago, I was last interrogated. The facade had changed, but the weight on the back was the same. And I understood that the past was not just knocking on the door. He was breaking in and tearing everything down. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, almost polite. He said he knew where I slept, who knew I was digging too much, that if I didn't stop, the next body to appear in a square could be mine. After that, silence. I thought about running away, change city once again, start over, but I got tired. I'm tired of running away, to hide, to live as if each step were the last. And even more so, I'm tired of seeing my daughter get lost and do nothing. I knew where this was going to end. I had already seen this film, and I no longer wanted to watch in silence. That late afternoon, she called me, first time since the gate. The voice was choked. He said he needed to see me, that it was urgent. I made an appointment at a remote cafe in a neighborhood where no one knew us. When she arrived, she was haggard, with dark circles under her eyes. her hair tied up in any way. He sat without saying anything. He held my hand for a few seconds. Then he let go, and he started talking. He said it didn't start out bad, which at first was just a favor, a bridge, a helping hand to a friend. Then came the money, then silence, and finally, fear. He said he got involved with the wrong people, who tried to leave, but they threatened their son, and she didn't know what else to do. I heard everything silently. Her every word was a do. Not because of the confession itself, but because I saw in her exactly the same woman I was. Same logic, the same tone, the same justifications. And then, when she finished, she looked at me with teary eyes and asked, almost like a child, "Tell me, Mom, am I like you?" I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, and I responded, "No, you are not like me, because I never had anyone to warn me, to pull me back. But you do. You have me, and he has a son, and there's still time." She cried. For the first time in a long time, no anger, but the peace was short-lived. 2 days later, I was called to testify. Someone had made an anonymous tip linking me to an old money laundering, and they mentioned the gun, the same gun as the bag, the same one who was now with someone I didn't know. I went to the police station, with my heart sinking. I gave my real name. I handed over a copy of the photo, the back with the notes. He said he didn't want immunity. I just wanted to protect my grandson. I told everything I knew. The policeman looked at me like someone watching a ghost speak, said he'd check, but for now, I should remain silent, for safety. As I left the police station, I received a message. It was a photo from my grandson sitting in front of the school, and a sentence written in capital letters, "He will be next." That was the exact moment I broke. That moment tore me apart. The past beat me. It destroyed me. It went through me like a spear. I returned to the pension, locked up, in tears, screaming alone in the bathroom, punching the mirror until the shards cut my hand. Blood was running down the sink, and the only thing I could think was, I failed again. It was there, on the bathroom floor, among broken glass and guilt, that my decision was born. I was no longer going to remain silent. I was no longer going to protect anyone with lies. The truth could destroy me, but perhaps it would save what could still be saved. I went to the press. I was going to tell everything. He was going to hand over names, evidence, connections, even if it cost me what little I had left. If you are still here, listening to this story, comment now with the word enough, because that was the word that saved me that day. Enough silence, enough fear, enough of repeating the same mistakes, pretending it's out of love. Subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell and share with those who need to understand that sometimes the greatest act of love is exposing the truth, because hiding mistakes from those we love doesn't protect us. Poison. And one day, he charges too much. I chose to speak, even shaking, even alone, because I still believe that saving someone is worth more than appearing strong. The next day, the sun rose colder than usual, not because of the temperature, but because of the way it illuminated things without heating anything up. It was as if the world had stopped pretending there was still innocence. I spent the morning preparing everything. I took the photos. I gathered the papers. I handwrote every detail I remembered. The names, the meetings, the dates, the places, the money that went under the table, the threats, and above all, the link that connected my daughter to all of that. For the first time, I didn't cry. For the first time, I didn't tremble. I was decided. I went to an old building in the center, where the offices of a small newspaper were located, but known for reporting things that no one else had the courage to do. I waited almost an hour before they answered me. When I finally got in, I got straight to the point. I handed in the papers. I asked them to listen to me. I talked about the scheme, from the gun, from the past, and how all of this was now in the hands of people who don't think twice about erasing lives. The journalist who listened to me had tired but attentive eyes. He took notes. He recorded my speech. He said he would need to check everything, that this was too serious. If it were true, it involved important people. I just said I didn't care about the risk anymore, that the only thing I wanted was for my grandson not to grow up with the burden of carrying an inherited lie, and that my daughter, even if she hated me for the rest of her life, had the chance to get out of this before the worst happened. That same afternoon, I received a call. It was the prosecutor who was heading an investigation into financial crimes linked to public assistance. Someone had forwarded my statement. He wanted to hear from me in person. I went to the forum. I entered alone, head high, heart silent. He received me formally, but with an almost suspicious curiosity. I told it all again, and I handed over what I had, the photos, the names, the connections. When I mentioned Vicente's name, he stopped writing. He said that name was in an old dossier, from an operation archived due to lack of evidence. I said that if that were confirmed, it wasn't just my daughter who was at risk. It was a whole scheme about to collapse. He asked me if I was sure what I was doing, and I replied that it was the first time in decades that I was sure of something. 2 days later, movements began. The police went to the place where, years ago, I had buried documents and objects that I kept as a kind of penance. They were there, intact, the weapon, the old notes, a notebook with codes, encrypted, names. It was little, but it was enough to connect ends. Meanwhile, my daughter was subpoenaed to testify. I received a message from her, a dry sentence. How could you? I took a deep breath and didn't respond, because sometimes silence is the only way to not destroy what can still be rebuilt. The prosecutor called me the same day. He said the evidence was sufficient to initiate proceedings, that there would be hearings, that my daughter would be heard, but that what I did could prevent something much worse. For the first time, he called me by my full name, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me as more than a shadow. The next morning, I received a visit from an unexpected person, one of the women who, in the past, was with me in the darkest moments. Her name was Clara. She had disappeared. They say she fled to another country. But now he was there, in front of me, gray hair, hard eyes, but with a tenderness that only those who have been through hell know how to have. She said she heard what was happening, that she was afraid, but was willing to talk, that he also had things to tell, who also wanted to break the cycle. We set up a meeting with the prosecutor, and there, together, we told what we knew, the connections, the dirty contracts, bought politicians, children used as shields. Clara delivered recordings, old, but clear, recognizable voices, including Vicente's, threatening a woman with details that could only have come from within. The article came out on Sunday, first page. Fictitious name, face blurred, but the story was there, and the real names were with justice. The comments spread, the city whispered. Some tried to discredit it, others were silent out of fear. But the most important thing happened inside my own home, or rather, in the heart of someone who I thought would never forgive me again. On Monday, my grandson showed up at the boarding house where I was staying. No warning, with a backpack on his back and a look that was too serious for his age. He hugged me. He said his mother was in shock, who cried in secret, who didn't talk to me, but who didn't hate me either. He asked me if everything they said was true. I said yes, that I was wrong, and now he was trying to get it right. And he, with a maturity that dismantled me, said that this made me someone better than many people he knew. There, in that hug, I understood that my decision was not in vain. If you are still here, listening to each part of this story, comment with the word proof, because that's what, in the end, changes everything. A proof, a document, a recording, a courage. Subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell, and share with someone who thinks it's too late to get up. Because sometimes the turning point comes when we decide to stop protecting the error with silence. It's not over yet. Justice began to move, but the final confrontation was yet to come. And the truth, that is no longer silent. The forum room was cold, silent, and lit by a white light that did not forgive wrinkles or sad looks. I was sitting in the second row, with my hands in my lap, trying to keep my posture upright, but inside, everything was shaking. The final confrontation had arrived. It wasn't a film, it wasn't a memory, it was now, and there was no escape. My daughter, who I had once held in my arms with a fever, who I had protected from dangerous men, who I had fed with what little was left of my dignity, now sat in front of a judge, her eyes red and her shoulders hunched with shame and anger. The prosecution presented the evidence, reports, recordings, gun registration, the money trail, everything carefully linked together, everything pointing towards her and a bigger, deeper, dirtier group. I never took my eyes off her, not even when they tried to paint her as manipulative, not even when the defense lawyer claimed psychological pressure. I just wanted her to know that even though I did what I did, even delivered what I delivered, I wasn't there to see her fall. I was there to see the truth emerge. When they called me to testify, time stopped. Each step to the witness chair felt like a lifetime of dragging feet. I sat down, took a deep breath, and looked straight at the judge. I told everything. From the first delivery, decades ago, to the last night I saw my daughter crying, hiding in the kitchen. I spoke about fear, poverty, hunger, but I also talked about choices, of the lies, from the rotten inheritance that I tried to hide, and the courage that I found too late, but that was still mine. The hardest moment was when the lawyer asked me if I believed my daughter deserved to be punished. The room fell silent. I took a few seconds to respond. Then, in a firm voice, he said that she deserved something greater than punishment. He deserved the chance to do something different, to teach your own son to walk out of the mud. But to do so, it was necessary to face the consequences. The truth frees, but it also weighs, and no one takes lightly what was built on lies. My daughter didn't cry while I spoke, but her eyes, those eyes I first saw in a maternity ward, were filled with something I hadn't seen in years: confusion, pain, and perhaps, for the first time, regret. The prosecutor ended with a strong speech. He said that society needs justice, but that justice begins when someone has the courage to break the cycle, when someone decides to speak, even if it costs everything. And that, in that case, it wasn't just about financial crimes, but about corrupt legacies being passed from mother to daughter. And that, there, a woman had chosen to break the chain. The sentence did not come that day, but the impact remained. When I left the room, many looked at me with respect, others with contempt. But for once, I didn't care, because now I was no longer a shadow. It was presence, it was voice. She was someone who, despite everything, had refused to die in silence. The following week, the press began to release details. My face was not yet publicly known, but my story was already circulating. I received anonymous messages, some of hate, others of gratitude. A woman wrote to me saying that, upon hearing my story, she decided to tell her husband that she was abused by his brother in her youth. Another said she reported a corruption scheme at the daycare center where she worked. It was as if my voice, so silenced for decades, had finally found an echo. My daughter was heard again, this time alone. No lawyers on the side, without heavy makeup to hide tiredness. He told everything, confirmed the names. He handed over more evidence. He said he chose silence out of fear, and then out of pride. But when she realized that her son could grow up carrying the same shame that she had about my life, she decided to speak out. He said he didn't want to be my continuation, and at the same time, he thanked me for facing it first, for showing that it is possible to get out even if you are limping. When she left the room, she saw me in the hallway. It stopped. He remained motionless for a few seconds, and then he walked towards me. We hugged. It was short. It was tough, but it was true. And there, without saying anything, we sealed what was left. Not complete forgiveness, but a kind of understanding that there is no way to erase what we lived through, but maybe there's a way not to repeat it. In the following days, the investigations deepened. Vicente was located, tried to escape. He was arrested with false documents and an absurd amount of money hidden in a safe. Other names emerged, and the web began to unravel. I was called again, this time to accompany a final hearing on the evidence delivered, not as an accused, but as an essential part of the process, an agent of truth. Words from the prosecutor himself. In that room, with everyone involved present, including those who previously threatened me, I stood up. No handcuffs, no guilt. And for the first time, completely clean. Justice did not erase what I did in the past, but he also didn't condemn me for what I had already paid 1,000 times in silence. There, I realized that dignity doesn't come when the world applauds you. It comes when you look in the mirror and no longer feel ashamed of who you have become. If you got this far, comment with the word justice, because that's what it's all about. Not revenge, but of justice, and not the one that destroys, the one that rebuilds. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell, and share with someone who needs to understand that it's never too late to lift your head and say, now that's enough. Because the most difficult confrontation is not with others. It's up to us. It's not over yet. A fresh start is missing, and sometimes the end is just the beginning told in a different way. 6 months have passed since the day I said it all out loud in front of an entire room, and my daughter, for the first time, looked at me as someone who was not just part of the problem, but perhaps part of the solution. A lot has changed since then, and a lot of things are still coming together, like shards of glass carefully replaced. Nothing is back to the way it was before, but in a weird way, that's a good thing. Because what was before was all supported by lies, fear, and silence. And now, even with the pain and scars, there is something new growing. Something I no longer knew was possible. Peace. Today, I live alone in a small apartment at the back of a corner house. The place is simple, 2 rooms, a cramped kitchen, and a balcony from which you can see the street. There is no luxury, but there is dignity. And dignity, when it has been taken from you for so long, becomes the greatest of treasures. My income comes from small jobs as a caregiver for the elderly. Most people know me by name. Others just call me Donna Maria. I no longer hide who I am. When people ask me why I'm there, I say I'm starting over, and that I was a lot of things before being who I am now. The relationship with my daughter is still full of care, like someone stepping on wet ground after a flood. But little by little, we started talking again. First about practical things, then about the grandson, then about life, and finally, about what we were and what we no longer want to be. She still has moments when she is too quiet. What are you to blame for? But now, she doesn't shy away from the conversation, and that's already a lot. She resigned from her position. She is part of a small social project, helping women who have left the prison system to rebuild their routine. He said that, for the first time, he feels like he is doing something right without having to hide anything. And I believe. My grandson visits me almost every weekend. He brings books, teaches me how to use my cell phone, talks about school, his friends, his fears. The other day, he told me that he wrote an essay about me. The theme was courage, and he told the teacher that courage, sometimes, is telling the truth when everyone expects you to keep lying. I cried softly when he said that, because at that moment, he knew something inside him was saved, and that alone, would have been worth it. The black bag, the same one that was once thrown at me in anger, is now in storage, not as a bitter memory, but as a symbol. Inside her, now, there is no longer the weapon, nor the evidence, nor the fear. There are letters, written by me, 1 per month, all with excerpts from my story, not to relive the pain, but to record it, so that one day he can read it calmly and understand it. Not to forgive, not to judge, but to get to know you. Because no one can grow up whole without knowing where they came from. Some people stayed away after the story broke. Others approached. I discovered that when you show your truth, it scares those who still live undercover, but it also attracts those who are tired of pretending. I made new friends. One of them, Donna Selena, is 72 years old and was mistakenly arrested in the 90s. Today, she gives lectures on miscarriage of justice and injustice. Together, we started a small support group for women who want to tell their stories. Shameless. No mask. No, I didn't become a celebrity. I was not interviewed on television. I didn't make money from what I lived. But I gained something that had been denied to me for decades. Freedom, coming and going, without looking over your shoulder. To sleep without any disturbances. To look at myself in the mirror and not look away. The other day, passing through a square, I saw a mother pulling her daughter in a hurry. The girl cried, and the woman, nervous, said that if she didn't shut up, she would leave her alone there. That went through me. I walked up to them, took a deep breath, and said carefully that sometimes what we say in anger remains in a child's memory forever. The woman looked at me with contempt and left, but the girl looked at me as if she understood and smiled. Maybe she'll forget, maybe not. But if you remember, you might remember someone who tried to say that words have weight and that sometimes they are crueler than the acts themselves. Tomorrow, I'm going to visit my daughter. She invited me to lunch. He said he wants to talk about the future, about changes, about how even among so much wreckage, there is still hope. I'll take a cornmeal cake and an envelope with the first letter I wrote to my grandson, in case one day I'm not here anymore. The letter begins with a simple sentence. It's never too late to recover what they tried to steal from us. Even if that something is just the right to look me in the eye and say I'm no longer ashamed. If you've stayed this far, listening to me, feeling me, following me, comment on the word dignity, because she was the one who brought me back. Not money, not status, not forgiveness. It was dignity. the one I lost, the one I rebuilt, and the one that protects me today more than any secret. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell, and share this story with someone who has already thought about giving up. Because if I, with everything I've experienced, managed to get up, so can you. We are not what they did to us. We are what we choose to do with what is left. And I chose to continue. A week after lunch with my daughter, I received a brown envelope left under the door of my small apartment. There was no sender, no name, just my handwritten address, in firm, precise handwriting. I opened it carefully, like someone opening something that could explode. Inside was a dossier, color photos, conversation records, transcripts of wiretaps, and, in the middle of it all, the face of a man I hadn't seen in over 30 years. Vincent, alive, clean, smiling, dressed as a real estate businessman, posing alongside local politicians during the inauguration of a housing project. The same project that my daughter, years ago, tried to oversee, and then she was removed. The same one that was now linked to the scheme that was falling apart at the ends. On the last page of the dossier, a note, handwritten, unsigned. He never left. He only learned to wear a suit. Take care. I knew immediately who had sent it. Clara, my old acquaintance from dark times, who now reappeared as someone who couldn't show herself, but refused to remain silent. I took a deep breath and put the documents in a shoe box. I knew that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Over the next few days, I realized I was being watched. A black car parked on the other side of the street, always at the same time. Headlights off, dark glasses. On 2 occasions, I saw a man get out, walk to the corner, and come back without speaking to anyone. In another case, someone rang the doorbell, and when I went to answer it, there was no one there. Only a package with dried flowers and a note that told some truth should not leave the earth. It was a threat. It was a message. It was a warning. I went to the police station. I took the documents. I spoke to the prosecutor. They said they would investigate, but I knew that kind of response. It was protocol, and protocol does not protect those who know too many secrets. I decided not to back down. I arranged a conversation with a journalist, the same one who had published the first article. I told you about the car, about the ticket, about the dossier. I delivered copies. She said that if something happened to me, she would know where to look for those responsible. My daughter was shocked to find out. She said that if I wanted, she and my grandson would disappear from the map. They would change their name, of city, of life. I said no. Running away was what I did my whole life. Now it was time to face it. He said she should keep doing what she was doing, that his new life, clean and honest, was the best shield, that continuing was resistance, and that I would take care of the rest. That same week, I received an unexpected call. A lawyer. He said he represented a witness defense foundation, that they were aware of my involvement and wanted to listen to me. I went to them. I told what I knew. I showed the documents. I was listened to carefully. In the end, they offered me protection. New address, new name, new identity. I thanked you, but I refused. He said the only thing he wanted was justice. Don't disappear, but show up. Stay visible, because those who disappear give reason to those who threaten. The journalist published a new article, deeper, with photos from the dossier, with names, with documents. It made headlines. Headline that bothered, headline that exposed, headline that ripped off masks. That same night, the black car disappeared from the street. The following day, one of the politicians mentioned in the article resigned from his position. Another was arrested preventively. Vicente, however, was still a ghost, but now a ghost with nowhere to hide. A special hearing was scheduled. This time, not just for my daughter, but for me, for Clara, for other names that came to light after the report. The forum was full. People in suits, ordinary people, people who have never looked me in the eye before. And now he watched me as if I were a rare piece on a dirty board. During my testimony, I spoke slowly. No fear, with the clarity of someone who has lived too long to pretend. I told you again what I experienced, but, mainly, I told what I saw, what I heard, what I silenced, and why I decided not to be silent anymore. The judge, in the end, thanked him. He said that, without my report, many victims would still be nameless. No face, no justice. And there, in that crowded room, where one day I would have entered with my head down, I left standing up. Because for the first time, It wasn't the woman from the past who spoke. It was the woman in the present who had decided to turn the key. My daughter was there, sitting at the back of the room, with teary eyes. When we looked at each other, there was something new between us. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was respect. A respect built on ruins, but solid, like ancient stone that resists time. We left the forum without saying much. We went to a nearby bakery. We sat down. She ordered a coffee. I ordered tea. We were silent for a few minutes. And then she said that if they ever wrote our story, she wanted it to start with a sentence. The truth saved what? Love alone could not. I just smiled, because she understood. If you've stayed with me this far, comment with the word courage. Because she is the one who changes everything. Not the courage to hit, but to no longer lower your head, to continue even shaking, to talk even to yourself. Subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell, and share with someone who needs to remember that courage is not shouting. Courage is when you choose not to die with what you swallowed your whole life, and choose, finally, to live. And if you, in some corner of the world, felt this story was yours, know that you are not alone. Not damn it, not lost. It's alive. And that, my dear, is more than enough to start over. The week after the hearing, the city looked different. Not because of the buildings or the streets, but because of the way people looked at me. Some with suspicion, others with curiosity, but there were also those who looked with respect. A silent respect, which is born when someone realizes that you survived something that would kill many inside. I started walking more calmly, breathe more deeply, feeling the ground beneath your feet as if you were stepping on a territory that now belongs to you. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was actually present in my own life. The day before the final judgment, I received a handwritten letter. It was folded carefully, without an envelope. It was from a woman I had never met. She said she was a cellmate of Clara, my former ally. I said that one night, Clara spoke about me, about the story, about the trial, about the courage of a woman who refused to die with her mouth closed. The letter ended with a phrase that stuck with me. When a woman breaks her silence, no chain can hold the lie any longer. I kept that sheet with the other memories I kept, not out of attachment, but out of memory, because forgetting what saved us is also a way of dying slowly. On the morning of the trial, I dressed in my best clothes. It wasn't new, but it was clean, well ironed. It was dark blue, the color my mother said brought firmness. I will love my hair in a bun, as always. But this time, I added an old brooch that had belonged to my grandmother, a small silver bird with open wings. When I looked in the mirror before going out, for the first time, I saw myself whole, not as a victim, nor as a culprit, but like someone who walked through fire and still chose not to burn another. My daughter arrived at the front of the court accompanied by the lawyer and the prosecutor. The grandson was with her. As soon as he saw me, he ran to me and hugged me. I said quietly that everything was fine, that he knew who I really was, and that he was proud of me. I wanted to cry, but I didn't let it. I just smiled and thanked him with my eyes. The room was full. The judge, upon entering, asked for silence and seriousness. The case, now public, aroused interest in several sectors of the city. The prosecution presented the final line of facts. He exposed the evidence, reaffirmed the statements, and recommended that, due to active collaboration, my daughter be subjected to restrictive measures, but not imprisoned. He argued that she had broken with the corrupt system and handed over names that were now in prison or being investigated. The defense agreed, adding that my daughter was now dedicated to a social reintegration project and that she assumed full responsibility for the acts committed. When the judge read the sentence, everything stopped. The time, the thoughts, the air inside the room. He said justice is not revenge, that punishing for the sake of punishing gives nothing back to anyone, that in that case, the greatest punishment had already been imposed by life, and that the fresh start would be monitored, but possible. My daughter received a sentence of supervised release without the right to public office for 10 years. But he left with his head held high, and I, with a firm heart. Outside, some people applauded discreetly. Others approached. A lady touched me on the arm and said she saw her own story in mine, that he had also been too silent, which he had also lost. But, seeing what I did, He understood that he could still choose differently. That gave me strength that no court would be able to give me. In the following days, I began to be invited to tell my story in small meetings of women in the community, in churches, in cultural centers, in neighborhood associations, not as an example of purity, but as someone who made a mistake, fell, suffered, and still decided to get up. I started writing weekly letters, published in a local newspaper, under the name Vose's Tardius Column. The first letter was titled with a phrase that I now repeat every day. It's never too late to be heard. My daughter continued on the project. The grandson returned to school with more confidence. And me? Well, I started to live with less fear, more faith. And I'm not just talking about religious faith. I speak of faith in the possibility that a woman like me, with all the blemishes I carry, can still be useful. You can still teach. You can still love without having to hide your face. At night, when silence comes and the city sleeps, I sometimes find myself remembering the dark days, from the leaks, of the lies, from the alleys where I hid my name. But now, those memories don't hurt like they used to. They just remind me of what I no longer want, than I will ever be again. If you are listening to me now and felt something inside you with this story, comment with the word fresh start, because that's what defines me today. I am not my mistake. I am what I chose to do after him. Subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell, and share with those who need to hear that justice does not end in court. It continues in the choices we make every day when the world isn't looking. And remember, even after everything, you can still walk with your head and rigid. Even if they tried to bury you alive, if you are still breathing, there is still time to flourish. After the trial, after the sentence, after the last tear that fell without warning in the corridor of that silent forum, life returned to its rhythm. But it wasn't the same pace as before. There was a new cadence, a different calm. It was as if time had learned to respect my story. I woke up early, made my coffee, opened the window, and looked at the people on the street. I no longer looked for stopped cars. I didn't expect any more threatening notes. Instead, he waited for the sound of his grandson running down the sidewalk, his daughter texting in the middle of the afternoon, the kettle whistling on the stove with its warm, soothing steam. Little by little, small things began to gain enormous value. The smell of beans on fire, the sound of rain on the tin roof, a neighbor's laugh at the gate. Things that previously went unnoticed and that were now silent celebrations of a new beginning that, even late, was deeply worthy. My daughter started painting again, something she had stopped doing at a young age when everything seemed like an obligation. Now she painted on makeshift canvases, sometimes pieces of cardboard, other times canvas stretched with tape. He painted female faces, always with intense eyes. One day I asked who those women were. She replied that they were the ones who decided not to disappear, those who screamed late, but still in time. I understood without needing to hear anything else. Her project grew. Other women began to participate, former inmates, single mothers, grandparents who raise their grandchildren while their children hide from their own mistakes. I was invited to tell my story at one of these meetings. I got nervous, not out of shame, but out of fear of not knowing what to say. However, when I stood up and began to speak, the words came like a river that had long been dammed. I told you from the beginning, I spared no details, but I also did not seek applause. When he finished, there was silence. And then, one by one, women I had never seen before began to hug me. Some were crying, others just held my hand. There I realized that my story, however heavy it was, now served as a bridge, reference, of healing. The grandson became part of a group of young people who write letters to abandoned elderly people. He himself asked me to review the first letter he wrote. It said so. "Hello, my name is Gabriel, and I learned from my grandmother that dignity is not about having a perfect life. It's having the courage to face what was imperfect." I cried silently as I read, trying not to get the paper wet. I told him it was perfect, and it was. One day, I received an invitation to attend a conference on restorative justice. I went with my daughter. We went on stage together. We speak side by side. At certain moments, our speeches crossed as if we were writing the same letter with different hands. At the end, one of the organizers said that she had never seen a mother and daughter so marked by pain and so united by the same desire to start over. That moved me deeply, because for years, I thought my daughter hated me, and maybe he really hated it. But now, what united us was not the past. That's what we did with him. I still have the bag, the same, not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of turning point. Inside it are now symbolic objects: Clara's letter, my grandmother's brooch, a drawing made by my grandson, a newspaper with the first article published about the case, and a copy of the sentence. Everything that was once a source of shame is now there as a witness that it doesn't matter how the story begins. What matters is what we do with it. Every now and then, I still hear whispers in the streets, people who point, who comment, who judge. But I learned that those who talk behind your back are because they don't have the courage to look you in the eye. And today, I look you in the eye. From everyone. Because anyone who has been too invisible knows the value of being seen. My daughter and I have agreed that on each of her birthdays, we will write a letter to each other. No filters, no emotional makeup. The first was delivered in a purple envelope. She wrote that she now understands why I was silent for so long, who doesn't forgive everything yet, but forgives me. And that, for someone who was once buried in silence, is a resurrection. If you've stayed with me this far, comment with the word reconstruction. Because that's what defines me today. I am not what they destroyed in me. I am the one who chose to rebuild with what was left. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel, activate the bell, and share with those who need to know that not all scars are ugly. Some are signs that we survived a fire from within and still had the strength to plant flowers in the ashes. We still have more to tell, because when a woman finds her voice, she never whispers again. On a Saturday with clear skies and light wind, I woke up before dawn. The city was still sleeping, and the silence seemed to respect my new way of existing. I put water on to boil, cut some fruit, brewed some coffee, and sat on the porch with my notebook on my lap. It had been 3 months since the conference at which I spoke alongside my daughter. Since then, we started recording each week as if they were chapters in a book. She wrote on her side, I on mine. Afterwards, we exchanged notebooks. It was a way to continue talking even on days when silence was necessary. Reading what she writes helps me understand parts of her that I never knew. And writing what I feel heals me from parts of myself that I didn't even know were hurt. It has been our pact, our way of keeping the flame of dialogue alive without forcing forgiveness, without rushing affection. Because true love, after so much pain, needs time to relearn how to breathe. My grandson now participates in a cultural project aimed at young people who grew up with grandparents as the main figure. At our last meeting, he took a photo of us taken in the forum corridor on the day of the final judgment. In it, he appears holding hands with me, looking straight ahead. The project coordinator said that he explained to his colleagues that his grandmother is not perfect, but she is the bravest woman he knows, and that, if one day he is afraid of being who he is, he will remember the way I faced my past. That gave me strength that I couldn't put into words. Because for a long time, I thought the legacy I would leave would be one of shame. But today, I realize it's not about forgetting what we did. It's about what we teach by how we choose to live afterwards. The black bag, a symbol of everything that was once thrown at me as trash, is now used at my daughter's project meetings. It is placed in the center of the wheel as a symbolic invitation for each woman to deposit something there that once hurt her. An object, a word written on paper, a symbol. And in the end, that bag is emptied. Not to be forgotten, but to show that nothing there carries pain anymore. That what was once used to hurt now serves to heal. I receive letters from women from other states, from other countries. Some wrote from the countryside, others from large capitals, others from prisons. They tell their stories, their traumas, their guilt, their silence. And thank you for speaking. They say that if I, at almost 70 years old, had the courage, they can too. One of them wrote something I will never forget. She said that her story was made up of torn pages, but that after listening to mine, she understood that it was always possible to start a new chapter, even with shaky hands and stained paper. This phrase is now framed on the living room wall, the living room of my simple but lively apartment, where you hear low music in the morning, where the kettle whistles punctually, where peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of meaning. Some people who judged me in the past are now approaching me, Some apologize, others just listen. And that's okay. I don't hold any regrets. I learned that heartache is like a closet locked from the inside. You think you're protecting something, but in reality, you're just trapping poison. I don't want any more poison inside me. I want space. I want lightness. I want to continue being useful without having to hide the scars. These days, I sat with my daughter in the backyard of her house. She served tea, looked me in the eye, and said she would like to write a book about our story, but not to sell, to leave to his grandson, so that he can read it when he is an adult, so that you know where your strength comes from, your courage, your ability to love even after the fall. I agreed right away. I said he deserves to know, not just our pains, but what we did with them. Maybe that's what's left of it all. Not the mistakes, but what we choose to do afterwards. Not the past itself, but how we choose to carry it, as a tool or as a chain. If you're listening to me now, comment with the word mirror, because that's what life is after all. A mirror where we need to have the courage to look at ourselves, even on days when the returned image scares us. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel. Activate the bell and share with someone who needs to hear that, even when everything seems lost, it is still possible to write new pages, and it doesn't matter if the paper is wrinkled. What matters is the strength of the hand that holds the pen. And if you saw yourself in any part of this story, know that this is not weakness. It's a sign that your soul still feels, still listens, it still pulses. And that, my dear, means you still have time. And if there is time, there is a chance. Today, as I sit down to write these last words, I feel as if I were closing a cycle that seemed eternal. For a long time, I believed that some stories didn't deserve to be told. I believed that my life, with so many flaws, so many fears, so many holes, would not serve as an example for anyone. But I was wrong. Because when we find the courage to expose even the ugly parts of our journey, something sacred happens. Silence becomes a bridge. Pain becomes shelter. Shame becomes a voice. I don't know how you got here. Maybe I started listening out of curiosity. Maybe you clicked on a random video thinking it would be just another sad story. But if you stayed until the end, if you heard every word, every truth, every fall, and every new beginning, then this story is now also a little bit of yours. And I thank you for that. I thank you for listening to me with an open heart. I thank you for not judging before understanding. I thank you for allowing me to exist, even if for a few minutes, within your memory. Today I understand that living is, first of all, choosing what to do with what they did to us. You can't erase the past, nor pretend that certain wounds didn't leave marks. But it is possible to use each scar as a map, like a lighthouse, as a reminder. I learned that love is not measured by the absence of mistakes, but by the willingness to do something different when you discover that you made a mistake. And that forgiveness is not forgetting what happened, but rather deciding that pain will no longer rule your life. I was afraid of dying alone. I was afraid I would never be forgiven. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to undo the harm I caused. But what scared me most, deep down, was the idea of dying without having been heard, of leaving carrying an entire world inside your chest that never found space to be told. And now, after everything, I know that I will no longer leave in silence, because every word said here was a piece of me that finally found a place. My daughter, who once kicked me out in anger, today offers me tea and conversation. We are not perfect. We are not a soap opera ending, but we are real. We are two wounded women who decided that they were no longer going to pass on the pain. The grandson, who previously saw in me just the grandmother who cooked and picked me up at school, now sees me as someone who had the courage to fall and get up. And that's how I want to be remembered. Not like someone who has never made a mistake, but like someone who never gave up trying to do it right, even after so long. If you carry old guilt, know that no guilt needs to bury you alive. If you think it's too late, know that time obeys courage. And that sometimes all it takes is one step towards the truth for your entire life to begin to reorganize itself. You don't have to wait for everyone's forgiveness to start over. You need to forgive yourself first. You need to welcome yourself with the same tenderness that you would give to a friend, a daughter, a woman you love. And if you have been silent for a long time, if you have become accustomed to being silent to avoid conflict, to protect others, to not bother, Please think about it. Silence can protect for a while, but you can also get sick, and the body charges dearly for what the heart swallows out of fear. This story has come to an end, but my life goes on, and yours too. And now that we are somehow connected, I ask you just one thing. When you look in the mirror next time, look at yourself with compassion, firmly, proudly, because if you've made it this far, it's because you're still alive, and that's all you need to change course. Life does not demand perfection. It only requires presence, courage, and a little faith in what can still flourish. If you've made it this far, leave your comment with the word flower, because that's how I see every woman who chooses to continue, a flower that resisted drought, storms, abandonment, and yet it refuses to wither. Subscribe now to the Emotion of Age channel. Activate the bell and share with someone who needs to hear that the time to start over has no age. And what dignity when he returns, he doesn't ask for permission. She comes in, sits down, and transforms everything. Thank you for letting me tell you this story. Thank you for existing. And thank you above all for feeling with me. Because if I managed to recover my voice, it was because you, on the other side, chose to listen. It's never too late to be heard. It's never too late to rebuild what they tried to destroy. And it is never too late, absolutely never, to regain your own dignity.